Hello, and welcome to the Argyle CISO Leadership Forum. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speaker. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsor's virtual booth at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booth from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat, and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our speaker, Jim Coyle, Security Strategist at Lookout. We're very excited to have Jim with us for a thought leadership presentation titled From the Front Lines, China-Based Mobile Threats. Welcome, Jim. Over to you.
Appreciate that warm welcome and good afternoon, everybody. I did want to talk a little bit about some of the threats that we're seeing that are stemming out of China. And there's been quite a bit of news lately that you may have caught. The U.S. government's recognized that apps that originate in China are owned and operated by Chinese companies have this ability to capture data that both American consumers, as well as public sector officials at federal, state, local government levels, all assume is private. And despite a lot of the political challenges that a hearing a couple of months ago had showcased, we as cybersecurity professionals work to identify vulnerabilities, understand the risk that they impose. We work to mitigate those threats and the vulnerabilities. And then we move to understand the risk that's left over. We either accept it or, we make determinations based on the defensive measures that are put in place. So the risk of data being at the hands of another nation state is ultimately what's being called into question. The data that's captured, and this is data that includes IP addresses, user agent, mobile carrier, time zone settings, identifiers for advertising purposes, device IDs, approximate location based on the SIM card or the IP address of the device, keystroke patterns for rhythms, which can lead to credential theft, and connected audio devices. And at least when it comes to the US, we've long needed a similar set of laws put in place, much like GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation that can be found in the EU. But currently, we only have the 2018 California Consumer Privacy Act in order to protect, personal identifiable information. So when it comes to TikTok, it's not the only app out there that has been caught surveilling journalists. Uber, just as an example, was caught back in 2017. Now, ByteDance, which is the parent company of TikTok, does in fact operate out of Beijing, which is subject to Chinese law, specifically Article 7, which they must support, assist, and cooperate with national intelligence efforts in accordance with law. This further becomes interesting. And when you listen to the hearing, there was a leaked audio conversation dating back to January of 2022, in which an employee of TikTok's US Trust and Safety team was speaking to their manager, recounting where this employee was set to meet TikTok's chief internal auditor. And this was supposed to take place at a restaurant off hours, asking them extremely detailed questions about the location and the details of the Oracle server that will be limiting foreign access to US personal data. This is otherwise known as Project Texas. Now, China as a nation state has roughly 25 or so cyber groups that the industry tracks. The group's targets, they range from industrial espionage, trade espionage, linked to the China's 5-year plan and the Belt and Road Initiative, economic dominance in specific regions, to military targeting of highly classified data, surveillance of dissidents, protesters, Taiwan and Uyghur and Tibetan activists. And specifically, we've been able to attribute APT41 to Bad Spy and APT15 to Moonshine and Bad Bazaar. Now, The Chinese Ministry of State Security is ultimately a combination of the US equivalent of the FBI and the CIA. And the Ministry of State Security has multiple divisions for intelligence collection, counterintelligence, propaganda, politics, intelligence analysis, and they absolutely love human, otherwise known as human intelligence. That's the person-to-person intelligence gathering. So interestingly, if we take a look back in May of 2022, the US Department of Justice had charged a US citizen for spying under the direction of the Ministry of State Security on pro-democracy activists, as well as Uyghur and Tibetan activists, as well as pro-Taiwan independent supporters. While multiple threat groups have been attributed to China's Ministry of State Security directly, other Chinese-based groups do act at the direction of the Ministry of State Security. And this makes many in the cyber world, as well as lawmakers, uneasy at the power at censoring pro-US content, as well as possible algorithm changes, especially when it revolves around election cycles. But it's not just the US. There's currently 34 states that have acted with various prohibitions, but the EU, Canada, Denmark, Belgium, the UK, New Zealand, Norway, Netherlands, France, and Poland have all made recommendations in order for their government civil servants and employees to remove TikTok from their mobile devices for national or similar national security concerns. And a few weeks back, the BBC had reported that TikTok had 2 employees in China, as well as 2 employees in the United States, who was tracking a UK journalist through her cat's account. Now, keep in mind, ByteDance has been very adamant about denying that tracking has been happening at all. Specifically, she was being tracked by IP, and that IP was then compared to ByteDance's employees' IPs to ultimately see who was meeting members of the press. Now, this required to geolocate the devices in question, but where the story becomes intriguing is the fact that the journalist didn't have a personal account. It was her cat's. So somebody had to do the legwork and the digging to identify that the cat was a journalist, and now they could link the 2 accounts together. So just to be clear, despite all the noise, TikTok's not malware. It just collects a lot of data, just like any other social media app. And a couple of years ago, there were allegations that their code used somewhat questionable methods, but it really just kind of turned out to be that it's really widespread, and especially with other social media apps. They also tend to use the same kind of code. Also, social media apps hoover up data because that's their business model. They want as much data as they can in order to deliver targeted advertising. And in the case of TikTok, this happens both inside and outside of the app. And just like Facebook, they also use code snippets on websites in order to track their users. So again, like other social media, they have algorithms that are tuned to keep users' attention. So it's just another harmless social media app, right? Well, yes and no. If you remember Cambridge Analytica, they had exploited a weakness in Facebook's API. And through that, they managed to acquire huge amounts of information that was later used in political influencing operations. So we know that data matters a lot. And Cambridge Analytica may have gotten more data than they should have, but they were very far from having full access to Facebook data. And it was also against Facebook's will. So now if we go back and we consider China's data security law, Article 35 states that individuals and organizations must comply with requests by China's public security bureaus and national security agencies for investigations. Quote, as long as proper procedures are followed, end quote, whatever that means. And TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, is certainly subject to this law. Now, by the way, a FISA court order could similarly compel an American company to provide data to American security agencies. So in the end, it all boils down to who gets the data and how are they going to use it. We're giving social media apps access to a lot of data, and it really just kind of comes down to trust. This is really where everybody has to do their homework on their threat model. Remember seeing all those content creators protesting in support of TikTok on Capitol Hill? Well, they're probably right as far as security is concerned. Their threat model is not the Communist Party or of the People's Republic of China. Neither is it likely for your teenager. It's probably online bullies, predators that you really have to be concerned about. And the provenance of the social media app really isn't particularly relevant for that. So right now, we'll just reserve judgment on how good TikTok or other social media apps are at counteracting these dangers. As you know, I'm certainly no expert on it. Now, if you work for the federal government, it's a whole different story. And the same if you have access to intellectual property or other proprietary information that other countries might be interested in. Keep in mind that the threat model is different yet again if you work for the Chinese, Russian, or Iranian government. Instagram is probably not what those employers want to see on their mobile devices for pretty much the same reasons we're looking at TikTok and the removal of it from US government devices and state government devices. The kind of data that these apps capture really does matter. However, TikTok's not alone when it comes to national security concerns. Earlier, we talked about Uber, but there's a few more to talk about, and we really need to be careful not to over-index on that threat alone. For one, remember what I said about TikTok's business model. It's essentially a company whose revenue really just comes from advertising. There's a lot of ad networks, and they all work the same way, tracking users across multiple different apps and websites. And TikTok's just more visible because it has a super flashy consumer product. Kaspersky, Huawei, they've also been in the news for many years for similar reasons, too much information flowing into the hands of potential adversaries. But here's a couple more that you should think about. Temu and Shein, they're top shopping apps in the United States, and they're among the most downloaded apps on both the Apple App Store as well as Google Play. And while they have slightly different models, you can think of them basically as the Chinese versions of Amazon. After all the talk about TikTok, we really hope that we got the message across that there can be risk involved in apps, even if they're not malware. Obviously, very, very much the same applies to online shopping apps, but I don't want to bore you with just another example of kind of the same type of risk. Temu actually does have connections to a parent company that is very concerning when we take a look at it. So just by the way of introduction, again, Temu is the #1 shopping app on both Apple App Store as well as Google Play. And you may want to check if it's on your device. It's not malware as far as we can tell currently, so there's no need to panic, but let's go ahead and talk about Temu. Temu is owned by an entity called PDD Holdings. PDD stands for Pinduoduo, which is one of China's most successful online retailers. Earlier this year, there was a Chinese security researcher who goes by the pseudonym of Dark Navy who published a blog in which they accused PDD of using exploits to gain privileged access on Android devices and to turn the app into a system so it couldn't be uninstalled. It was also used to inject code into other apps that were installed on the device in order to steal data. Now, when our research team investigated, this turned out to be true. Critically, not for the version of Pinduoduo that was on the Play Store, but it was basically installed into apps that were acquired from other sources. Now, it's not unusual to find malware in these third-party store apps. One of the most common practices to distribute malware is to download a legit app, inject it with malware, and then redistribute it to their targeted users. Ultimately, this is called Trojanizing the app. But our first thought, that was our first thought when we ultimately took a look at this app. Then we realized that these apps were signed with the legitimate signing key that had been used for the app on the Play Store. And that's where this gets interesting. There's essentially 3 possible explanations for this. First, the signing key may have been leaked and a malicious third party was using it to sign maliciously modified versions of Pinduoduo signed with the correct key. Second, there could have been a supply chain attack in which a malicious third party managed to introduce code into a legitimate build process, kind of like SolarWinds. And third, a deliberate business decision by PDD to exploit their customers' devices to increase revenue. Now, a CNN journalist contacted some sources inside PDD and found out that this is exactly what happened. There were actually a large team whose job it was to just purely look at exploits in order to increase Pinduoduo's revenue by keeping users from removing the app and gaining better information on those users. Now, if we go back to Temu, according to the CNN sources, the team at Pinduoduo was disbanded around the time Dark Navy's report was published. And they were largely reassigned to work on, you may have guessed it, Temu. Now, for malicious purposes, or not for malicious purposes, but the optics aren't all that great. So how do you feel about an app that could be on your device, knowing that it's made by a company and a team that deliberately pushed malware on their unsuspecting customers? But it gets even more interesting. Once the Pinduoduo story became clear, our researchers also started looking at Temu. And I do need to add a little bit of technical details here. The malicious code in Pinduoduo wasn't there for everybody to read. It had been packaged and executed in a custom VM. So some source code was not contained in the app package, but downloaded from a server. And the module responsible for this was called Manwi. And in case you're wondering, it's a Tolkien reference out of the Silmarillion, which is kind of obscure, but I guess there was some fantasy fans there. Anyway, so that same module was contained in Temu. And after the story broke, Google removed Pinduoduo from the Play Store. A new version of Temu was published on Play, but that module was not included. So as far as we can tell, the code could have been used to take over devices of Temu users, but we don't have any indication that it was used in that way. I do want to add one note. In China, it's not unusual for Android apps to have a function to download code from a server. This behavior is a violation of Google Terms of Service for the Play Store, but of course, there is no Play Store in China. And so without this infrastructure, apps bring along their own plumbing for updating and patching. That said, Manwi isn't that. Just a little bit of a postscript. I should mention that this isn't the first time a legit Chinese company operating in the West has been caught distributing malicious code. In June 2019, Lookout uncovered malicious code in Qtech's Beta Ads SDK. And ultimately, apps containing the company's code were banned from Google Play. And Qtech stock was worth around $125 a share when the blog was published. Last I checked, it was trading at 10 cents. Somehow, I doubt the same's going to happen, as Temu is still rated #1, even just last week when I checked, and there's now Facebook campaigns that are publishing on behalf of Temu. And it's rare and surprising to see malware in the app of large enterprises like Pinduoduo, but mobile malware in general is fairly common. And given how enmeshed our devices are in our lives, mobile malware can be extremely intrusive. It is true that the prevalence of malware is higher outside of major app stores, but that doesn't mean that the apps in the stores are necessarily malware-free. And as in the case of Pinduoduo, breaching the sandbox to access other apps' data is by no means the exclusive purview of sophisticated advanced persistent threats. But when we talk about APTs, though, I do want to bring up just a couple here. So we see state-sponsored malware covering use cases from quote unquote lawful intercept to espionage from many countries. Usual suspects pretty much include Iran, People's Republic of Korea, India, Pakistan, Palestine, Lebanon, Kazakhstan, and so on. And as you can probably imagine, quite often the word lawful in lawful intercept should definitely be in quotation marks. A disproportionately high fraction of mobile state-sponsored malware does come out of China. Lookout has published discoveries on Silk Bean, Double Agent, Carbon Steel, Golden Eagle, and Bad Bazaar over the last couple of years. And those are just the discoveries that we've reported in public. Attribution is really hard. And in these cases, we're extremely confident that these are not false flags. In China, certain contracts for business with the government must be publicly disclosed for transparency reasons. So in many cases, our researchers find the actual documents that prove that a company produced spyware for the government. And while those don't help in finding malware, once malware is found, which is often the case, and it's tied back to a producer, these documents provide final confirmation that it's actually a business that they engage in. And one of the Chinese state actors is PoisonCarp, otherwise known as Evil Eye. And their original Moonshine malware was discovered in 2019 by Citizen Lab. it was quite unusual for a Chinese advanced persistent threat group in that it used a one-click exploit that targeted at the Chrome browser. It then injected code into various popular apps to make itself persistent and gain access to the data from those apps. Our researchers found that the same code had been adapted for use in an app. The poison carp actors had injected it into a whole bunch of other Trojanized apps, which is all the icons that you're seeing on the screen on the right-hand side. And these Trojanized apps were then redistributed to the target populations, through various different kinds of social engineering. Now, Moonshine is a classic surveillance malware. It just grabs whatever it can: files, messages, location, audio, video, and so on. But the one interesting capability that's unusual, at least in mobile APT context, is something I want to draw your attention to. That's the SOX proxy functionality. Through that, the attackers can open connections into any private network that the device happens to be in. Usually devices on private networks are less protected than those on the internet. So this enables lateral movement in a sense, or probing or attacking devices on private home networks. Many of the mobile campaigns out of China target ethnic minority groups inside the country, such as Uyghurs and Tibetans. So what does mobile malware targeting of minority groups in China have to do with you or your customers? So as it turns out, there's quite a number of Chinese APT groups that are known to have targeted foreign enterprises and have been found to use mobile tooling. APT-10 has in the past targeted intellectual property in Japan. APT-40 targeted trade secrets of American companies. And there's one more group, but we can't talk about it publicly just quite yet. Most people would consider using a PC without an antivirus product negligent, but yet the same way is not yet widely understood for mobile phones and tablets. And this is where we really kind of need to focus on what's currently going on from that mobile vector. And currently, there's over 9 million apps that we have identified just in the Lookout data corpus that communicate with IPs, domains, or servers in China. So just some key takeaways. Adversaries are using a mobile-first vector approach. Geopolitics plays a role in cyber, especially the mobile vector. Governance, risk, and compliance from a mobile aspect are definitely going to be top of mind, and geopolitical legality issues. While legal proceedings may be complicated, dealing with international law can get even more complicated, especially if they have to take place in less friendlier nations, or even impossible for those nations that are seen as hostile. And with that, I'd like to see if we have any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. We actually do have a few questions. Here's one from the audience. What is the best way to determine if an app is safe or not?
Yep. So as a everyday end user, that's going to be quite difficult because you're going to have to do some analysis on the app and how your device is behaving in general. And while you could certainly take a look at things like, is your phone slowing down, is your battery utilization going up, ultimately you would really want us to take a look at the app. We do have a couple of offerings to where we allow you to upload an app to us, and we can do some reverse engineering and provide a report back of that application.
Great. Here's another one. Who do you feel has the responsibility of monitoring the app stores, Google and Android, or rogue apps offered to the public to download?
Yeah, great question. So there is a kind of a technology alliance, and we are a part of that, to where we do help both Google and Apple vet out apps that they have in their store. So when you hear stories about these apps being removed because they became malicious, typically that's because of the work of Lookout and that alliance.
Great. And does applying a VPN on the phone help?
It certainly can help from network-based threats, at least when it comes to stealing data or what we call adversary in the middle. However, ultimately, you're going to need some form of protection, minor self-plug here, but like Lookout, in order to ensure that application, device, and even network-based threats are not going to be successful on that mobile device.
Great. And do you have a list of identified apps?
Not one that we can publicly publish. Like I said, we've got just from a Chinese-based application perspective, we've got over 9 million different apps. So if we take a look at all the data that we've been collecting since roughly 2007, you're talking about hundreds of millions of apps that we've actually analyzed. In fact, today I think that number is sitting around right around 200 million.
All right. And what should we do to lower the enterprise risk?
Again, miniature self-plug here, but you're going to want to have some sort of mobile threat defense like Lookout. Ultimately, MDMs are not going to be the sole answer. MDMs are more of a policy-driven, thou shall not use third-party app stores. However, that still leads them completely susceptible for remote jailbreak, such as Pegasus, just as an example. You really need to have some sort of onboard, threat defense capability that's taking a look at behaviors, again, from an application, a network, and a device layer.
Great. And is MFA enough? Hold on, let's see. Is MFA enough for a mobile device?
Definitely not.
Okay. And with current budgetary constraints, we're forced to optimize every single IT investment. Based on your topic, can you share some ways you are seeing companies succeed at this for lower cost mobile threat detection?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, when we take a look at things like MDMs, they're very intrusive. They can be expensive at times. And if you're looking at trying to protect a mobile fleet, and you also want to engage in things like BYOD or bring your own device for your employees, MDMs aren't going to be the answer because folks don't want to be intrusive. So Lookout does have a capability where we do protect the end user's privacy. We're not peering into text messages or emails. What we're doing is we're looking at the network behavior of where a device is trying to go. And so we can provide, threat detection and prevention capabilities, as well as a response capability if it's needed. But that way, users can still utilize their devices, look at Facebook, check corporate email, access, documents, but they can do so in a safe manner. To where you can be, assured that you're not going to have some sort of mobile threat that exists on that device.
Great. And someone is actually asking, are there any online resources to learn more about Lookout offerings?
Absolutely. You can go to our website. We do have sections for our various products and services. We also have our blog section, which we post on pretty much regularly on new threats that we identify, new campaigns that we're able to talk about, and as well as our research that we publicly release.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. Someone asks, what's next in terms of mobile threats? Anything recent you can share?
I want to be careful around this one. So I will say there's kind of two things that are coming up. I believe we are going to be releasing something around APT 41 in the near future, as well as there's been a resurgence of Pegasus as of late. And I think that has a lot to do with the current Biden administration putting handcuffs on government agencies' ability to purchase Pegasus, just because of the business model where they have sold to questionable governments in regards to human rights. And so they have started to really kind of branch out from a sales perspective and getting Pegasus into the hands of a multitude of folks. And earlier this year, we saw, 50 U.S. officials who all had their phones replaced because they had, quote unquote, commercialized spyware that had been installed on them. So I do see supply chain compromises from a mobile perspective, as well as kind of a resurgence of spyware being quite prevalent.
All right. Well, thank you again, Jim, for such an incredible thought leadership session. I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event.